meeting of the year. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to the meeting. Please may I remind everyone that I expect you to treat all members of the committee, officers and other people who have been invited to speak with respect. Members of the public who are observing the meeting should not interrupt in any way. This meeting is being filmed by a member of the public, which is permitted. If anyone in the audience doesn't wish to be filmed, you will need to sit outside the range of the camera. So, yeah, thanks. And any apologies for absence? Declarations of pecuniary interest. Minutes of previous meeting, are they a true record?
Yep.
Okay. And I've decided to change the order of things a little bit, so to enable Edie to go to get off early, and so we're going to take single-use plastics first. So, Edie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me here to speak about the work of the single-use plastic task group. It was, well, as I said, when I first appeared before committee last year, that we know the challenge ahead of us is big. We know the World Wildlife Fund for Nature said over 1 million more tonnes of plastic waste will be disposed of in the UK by 2030. That's the equivalent of 87,000 double-decker buses. We know the challenge we can't meet alone, and the group itself was an all-party group of members, and I think we worked very well. I'd like to thank everyone who supported us, Stella as officer, and the 171 staff who took part in the survey, members here who were on the committee, but also witnesses and the officer as well for his support and his positive response, which is an appendix 2 of the report. And the 3 areas there that they've touched on: water, recycling, catering. I thought already, considering the report itself hasn't gone through the official works, and the response we've got so far has been quite positive, especially when it comes to food recycling and recycling in facilities outside the Civic itself. And finally, just to reflect on the future for yourself as a committee, we were very adamant that there is a lot of future scope and a lot of future work to do on this. So recommendations 10, 9, 8 and 4 reflect that, and particularly for me, while it was outside of scope, recommendation 8 about the food recycling was an interesting opportunity, and again, just thank you for officers for taking it on board and piloting that, and I'll take any questions at all anyone has.
Does anyone have any Councillor Making?
Thank you for this report. I found it very interesting and one of it. There's a couple of things I'd like to add to it. One is, not for this report, but for the future, can we continue looking at this all the way through next year and whenever? In fact, I would suggest you put it on the agenda for this committee every 6 months, just an update, nothing else. That's one. Also, you need to widen it a bit, and be only an Aggie Birdie who collects the waste from parks and street bins and things. Don't have separation. We'll be looking at how we can deal with that. And there is also something that came on the market that we're not in scope of this field anyway. That's to look into the possibility of recycling plastic back to its constituent part, the oil it's made of, and then reuse plastics, reuse the oil to make plastic again and so on, rather than have new virgin stuff all the time and have the old stuff. So if we can't actually cut down the usage, we're actually cutting down the use on new materials. But apart from that, welcome to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Aidan, for the report. I wanted to ask about recommendation 8, which is to effectively push back the monitoring of this task group's work onto this panel. I wondered if the task group had considered and discussed any actual targets or measurements of success, because I can't see any in the report. I just wondered what you've discussed.
Okay. Is there a further question at all, and I can answer it 3 at a time?
Mine's a lot broader actually, and it may not be a question for you, but it's really what's this council's view on the government's recycling and taxation environmental bill, and has it made a response to the government, and what is going to implement, what's its opinion and what will it change based on that?
Okay, I'll slightly touch on that on your question as well, because that was important. That was some important context we were aware of. So I just think, Anthony and Russell, I think your questions are sort of very related in the sense that we're very keen, we knew this, as I said, has a lot of legs and a lot of attention should be focused to it. In terms of specific metrics, we didn't go into discussion because we felt it was important for the committee itself to come together and actually agree with officers what potential is that, from a service perspective, what's the metrics, but also what are your hopes and aspirations as a group, and also potentially in consultation with others, the public as well, especially if you want to go outside the walls of the council and talk about the general contract itself. So, in terms of, David, your question, that's a very, very good point, and we were very mindful not to, that there is a lot of national change coming down the pipeline, and we didn't want to preempt anything or invent a new mechanism when we know that things are coming down. But at the same time, hopefully what we've done is complemented what is coming, and officers and others may want to answer and address your point directly.
Yeah, so the key point is, has there been a submission from the council on the environment bill?
No, there hasn't yet. We're working on that, and the deadline is, I think, the 15th of May. There will be a submission from the council, from the South London Waste Partnership, and from LEDNET, the London Environment Directors Network. And in summary terms, I think I'd say that it's generally going in the right direction. Merton is very well placed because many of the things the government are looking for in the bill are things that Merton has already implemented in terms of food waste, recycling, alternate weekly collections, and reducing the carbon emissions from the refuse collection service. So we are submitting a response and we're happy to share it.
Good, okay. Well, the second of your 3 points there, I don't recall reading that in the environment bill. It is a very boring read, so I'll be honest.
So, is that all the questions? Does anyone else have any more? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Can we, in the process, go through and find a way of making recyclable cups and things cheaper than the others to bring down, encourage people more to use those recyclable things? If the price is reduced, then it will give them the option, or make it better for them to use recyclable things.
I could probably slightly reflect on this course is a market decision, but ultimately, what's interesting, there's some insight actually that BP and it's referenced in the report made that we talk about switching from plastics to, say, glass, but actually from an energy-intensive production, glass is more energy-intensive to mould than the plastics. But we can actually recycle glass better than current plastics we have. So it's a decision that it's a tough decision to make, and of course the economics then plays into that. And of course it's not for the council itself, but in terms of procurement and trying to cost up, our core recommendation of the one, has that as part of the procurement framework. Now we are asking that question about what are procurement doing about plastics. So as a start, and again I would gently nudge the committee, future iterations of the panel here to look at that as a way to see what action has been taken.
Can I just add something to that? I think it is very difficult because there's 3 elements to the environment when it comes to any material. The first is the energy consumption when you're recycling versus something that's not been recycled. Secondly is when we talk about a package, has it been recycled or is it recyclable? And the problem is that there are weasel words when someone says this is 30% recycled or can be recycled. They mean utterly different things. And there's a challenge because nobody's really come to the answer. Certainly in 1989, when I spoke to Tetra Pak, I said that they needed to start recycling their products properly. They said in 25 years' time we'll be able to do it. But clearly they were not going to do it because when I contacted them 25 years later, they said that it takes 25 years. They're not interested. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is the energy consumption. Is it recycled or recyclable? And then the will of companies that use this for preservation, safety, quality and economics.
I'm not sure that this is
No, it's irrelevant.
necessarily part of this.
No, I totally agree. I just wanted to make those points because it was brought up and I thought I'd let you know.
Interesting, thank you for it. But, okay, shall we move to... Oh,
So just one point that we make relevant to the report is that can we almost insist on staff using cups rather than plastic cups all the time? Because every time I go to the restaurants here, they're doing 4 or 5 plastic cups of coffee for staff who are in the office. They could carry their cups down quite easily.
I think that's in the
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't at all want to speak for all staff here if Merton counts, but from the responses in Appendix 1, you can definitely see there's a hell of a lot of will and want to do this. And the point 3 in Appendix 2 in terms of the catering supply, some various levers have been put in place in terms of bring your own recyclable plastic cup. And you get a reduction in coffee, so that is hopeful to change that behaviour that you're referencing there, Russell.
I know you asked for it to come back every 6 months, but I think probably once a year would probably be good, but I don't know what is the kind of thing.
Slightly different point, Chair, but can I ask that in the office of reaction to the recommendations that we ask them to reflect upon appropriate metrics to measure the effectiveness of this?
Okay.
That would be useful. Thank you.
So can I make a suggestion that this report comes back maybe once a year rather than every 6 months?
Can we have just for new members with particular answer, for example, can we have when the officers tell us what happens next with this report?
Where they're taking it forward?
Where it goes and what happens when it comes back here.
Okay.
So, I think, personally,
I'm sure that will happen.
So I think it's not my report. The direction of it will be that it will go to Cabinet, for Cabinet to receive the report, and then to ask officers to produce an action plan in response to the recommendations, if the recommendations are agreed by Cabinet. It will go to Cabinet in the next, I think, 2 months, 2 samples. The report has to be received by Cabinet and then Cabinet asks officers to produce a report dealing with the recommendations.
and then it comes back here with the recommendations. So,
Okay. Everyone happy with that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
The next one we have is accessibility to local stations. Unfortunately, James Cappagh and Community Partnership and the specials for TfL and Michael Adlington, Accessibility and Inclusion Manager from Southwest Trains, aren't able to be here today, but I'm happy to come at a future date for to report back. But we've got Rory G from Root Group, who's manager for Network Green. Oh, have they? Okay.
Yeah, it's on the rules. Just a matter of
Okay, TFL, I understand, have just circulated a report. If everybody, does anybody want about 5 minutes to read it? Thank you for coming this evening. You don't really have a presentation, do you? You're just answering questions that people have to put forward to you.
No, I haven't got anything prepared. I suppose the only thing I would add as a kind of opening statement really is that from Network Rail's perspective, I think we absolutely recognise the importance of accessible stations, and with our partners at the Department for Transport, are obviously working on a number of accessible schemes to make as many stations as possible accessible across the network. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do on the Victorian Railway, so one of the key challenges we often have is funding, but we're always open to listening to the community and understanding what the key accessibility challenges are. Sometimes they're quite low-cost solutions that can be funded by third parties, can be funded in ways other than from the central government. So really the message from me is we're kind of open for business and looking to work with you in whatever way we can to kind of meet that challenge from an accessibility point.
So does anybody have any questions to ask on Network Rail?
Just a simple parameter to start with. How do you decree that a particular station typically requires some work regarding accessibility? For example, why are some stations chosen and others not?
That's a really good question. So I can talk you to probably the best way to answer that is to describe the bidding process that's just most recently been undertaken. So we can't do anything about funding. So our funding comes from the Department for Transport, and they've just announced another £300 million over the next 5 years across the country for accessible improvements. And so we worked with our lead operator on my part of the network, so that's South Western Railway, to develop a shortlist. And that was looking at 5 or 6 key metrics. So that's footfall. That's about whether there's a feasible solution. That could be about the location of the station in relation to key local amenities like hospitals, schools, etc. And effectively we came up with a shortlist, and that is what we submitted on behalf of our part of the industry to the Department for consideration. We have yet to get feedback from the DFT as to how that then was determined the final list in terms of what was announced. We are working on that with specific questions in relation to stations in the borough, that I'm sure we can get you those answers.
Yes, so just to follow that up, So what I mean, so essentially, whatever is ranked this time, unless there's a fundamental change around that station, that ranking is going to be maintained. So what I'd be really interested in the two stations here, which a lot of people are very positive about having accessibility issues, Oxford Park, Rains Park. So we'd like to see that list published and how much money needs to be spent to get down to where they are, so we can have some realism to say there is no hope, or there's only hope if there's X amount of money spent. So we can either change our tack or require more money.
Sure. So I think one thought for me on that is that that's kind of one of the more recent processes in terms of one of the funding streams that we have to try and deliver access for improvements. I think the two stations you mentioned, I don't know this for a fact, and I think we need to look at how much we can share in terms of the decision making that was gone through. They would be made fully accessible to across your two. So then you start getting into conversations about what do you do first? Do you build something that's potentially going to not have a full asset life? All those kinds of questions that perhaps are. It's difficult because what you want to do is deliver an immediate improvement for the community and for passengers, right? So that is something to consider there with those specific stations in mind. What else I would say as well is that we want to find other ways of funding these things. So just because that particular avenue wasn't selected this time around, it doesn't mean that we have to wait for another 5 years to find a way of funding these things and then look at how much is it actually going to cost to deliver an accessible improvement at those stations. We're certainly open to talking about that now and doing work to look at that now. There is the potential for other funding streams to be made available in the future. Again, that's a DFT-led thing, but looking at whether we can do kind of mid-tier interventions that are not quite as expensive as full-blown accessibility schemes, but still deliver a benefit. And there are also opportunities around business development, property development, unlocking contributions from developers that can be reinvested in stations as well. So for me, this is a bit of a beginning of a conversation, really, actually. So what we want to do is kind of build that relationship. We have good, strong working relationships with other boroughs and with other councils across our network. We're a big route geographically, and we're only just stepping into this kind of business development world.
So sorry, can I just switch one last thing then? In a parallel universe where Crossroute 2 will exist, I can understand. On the basis it won't exist, would you mind having a different parallel universe to make sure we push it up the rank? If that's clear, as it's not happening.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of on that, I suppose the rankings are only fixed as long as no stations get improved, because obviously some of the stations get taken out, so rankings do change. And I think the Department for Transport said that a fair geographical spread was also part of it, and that will change. But in terms of my questions, I'm really pleased to hear about the keenness to work together on funding. Obviously this time we asked and the council were open to looking at their capital programmes, see if there might be funding. So how does that conversation move forward from your point of view? What are the next steps? How can we get those looked at? I'm very interested in the sort of mid-ranking kind of improvements, given the sort of sheer amount of money that need to be spent to say Rains Park. But I am also very conscious of places like Morden Chase and Hayden's Road, where the options look easier and yet there's been nothing has happened. So what is it that stopped that? Thank you.
So I think from I suppose one point to consider, in my experience, every station is really quite different actually. So for something like Rains Park and Oxford Park, there may be no easy solution that does require some significant capital investment. For other stations, it might be something that actually with a bit of will and maybe 3 or 4 different small funding contributions, something can be done. And it's about identifying what that is and effectively having one organisation pushing that forward. I think in terms of offer, I'm absolutely happy to meet the relevant people from to look at what are your priorities. How does that align with how we score things? I think I would underline as well that our scoring matrix is a response to the DFT's criteria for this funding round, and of course those things change as well. So how things might rank in 5 years and footfall, and as you say, as projects get completed, all of those things are going to be in flux, and actually that's relevant only for the central government conversation. If we want to go and do something locally, we're absolutely open to doing that. There's different reasons and things behind justifying funding, isn't there? So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I'm just very keen that those conversations actually happen when they don't necessarily seem to have happened in the past.
Well, so I think you've got my contact details. My team exists to deliver projects, so hopefully we can get those conversations moving forward.
Any more questions? Oh,
Let me just come back and sort of explain some of the ways in which we do the dialogue. To date, we've principally been with Transport for London, and we secured funding through the LIP programme, and the recently consulted on the LIP programme is earmarking £140,000 per annum over the next 2 years for accessibility improvements. That's broader than just the rail network. It includes bus and tram services. And we are very keen to engage with Network Rail, and Morden. And indeed, South Western Trains themselves are just in the process of notifying local authorities and community organisations. They themselves are launching a fund called the Customer and Communities Improvement Fund. We've just been given a heads up on that today, where there are funds that look at everything from physical improvements. It also includes education, training, signposting. So there's a number of interventions, and each one is taking on their merit. So within the future Merton.TV, the transport and planning section, would very happily work with Network Rail to look and see what the opportunities are. And in addition to the money that's allocated through the LIP, it's also allowing us to prepare for future bids should we become available from the DFT or other organisations.
Sorry, Chair, maybe move on to questions on the report. Okay. Unless anyone else has any other questions.
So, only one then for me on Network Rail. We've talked about stations that don't have lifts. There are some like Morden that do regularly seem to fail or not work, so it's very often misleading to the public when they think that's supposed to be accessible. Have you had any sort of deals with South West Trains to help improve the list, make sure they actually do work more often rather than none of the time?
Is this specifically with reference to Wimbledon? Okay. I don't have any specific detail on sort of uptime, if you like, of the lifts at Wimbledon. I'm happy to go away and have a look at that if that's something we can pick up. The tricky thing with lifts as well is that unfortunately with lots of people in the industry, responsibility for things differs depending on what the fault is. So there will be some responsibility for SWR and some for us. So yeah, I'm happy to go away and have a look at perhaps what the cause is for failure of lifts there, and any information you can provide on that is kind of ready received.
if you've done that, you wanted to start asking questions on the report
I have some
itself.
questions on the report.
Let's just go through the new docs at 20 Okay. Have people got any more questions to the report? Do you want to stick to the end of this program? No, I'm happy for you to stay and listen to the rest of it. Okay, 1980.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for the report. I think, James, you sort of touched on some of this. I was going to ask about detail on the LIP. The objectives are set out in the report, but there's not much detail of how we might implement those. I was particularly interested in paragraph 3.4 on Rains Park and Oxford Park, but also 3.5 on the use of the planning process to improve accessibility at Wimbledon Chase and Hayden's Road, and I wondered if you could give me an update, please.
With reference to Rains Park and Oxford Park, we'll need some detailed feedback on the status of those. I think the report that was circulated details that the Rains Park would run further into the process for consideration by DFT. It's not something we've had that feedback on, but very happy to report back at the point in time we were aware of that. And likewise for Oxford Park fits in to understand the criteria for its success or failure. Regarding Wimbledon Chase and the reference to the planning process, there is a planning application that's being considered. officers would look to secure, at the very least, future-proofing accessibility through that development. I think the scale of that development in itself is unlikely to provide a Section 106 that would fund accessibility, but we will certainly look at that as part of the development. And on Hayden Road Station, I think in terms of the monies that I mentioned through the LIP, what officers would seek to do is to put together a list of projects, seek to prioritise those, looking to see what criteria would apply to those, and that very much is based on the frequency of use, and that, as I say, includes the bus and the tram network. So I think what we'd aim to do is to put together a list and prioritise that. And also with the announcement from South Western Trains that they have some funding available, look to see where we could secure match funding to enhance that LIP funding. It may bring some of the projects on the South Western Trains network further up the priority list if it provides some match funding.
On Hayden's Road, isn't there a planning condition or a planning obligation that would allow some relatively easy accessibility to one of the platforms?
I'm happy to check if there is. It may be that there's an agreement, but I'm not sure the status of the funding of that. I'm very happy to check and see whether that's something that's funded through a Section 106 agreement or otherwise, an update on the status.
It's just that there is, and it's eastbound, and somebody is saying something can't be done. So between TfL, Network Rail, Council, somebody needs to develop something that's sorting out. There is nothing on the west. I think there's neither on the west bound. No. Yeah, eastbound.
Okay, in terms of details of the LIP funding, all this is just a snapshot of the mayor's transport strategy. When can we expect to see the final submission from the council on the LIP tree, and when can that be brought to this committee so we can have a look at the actions before it gets signed off?
The LIP was consulted on from 1st of March through to 12th of April, so we're just pulling together all the responses on that. We've also had feedback on it from Transport for London, but the formal process of approval is that we would take it to Cabinet in June, and then it travels on from Cabinet to Transport for London by the 28th of June for their formal approval. It is then the timetable is a matter of some months before Transport for London fully approve it. Nevertheless, if there are uncontentious elements within it, the Council at risk can utilise some of those funds. And TfL have given a fairly robust response in terms of the draft. So if there were any areas where we thought we were in agreement subject to Cabinet's approval, we could consider if there's anything we want to implement prior to the formal sign-off from Transport for London.
Could I ask, would there be any merit in it coming to this committee in June? Because I think there's a meeting on the 27th of June. Would there be any point? Would it be useful to come to that?
It would have been to Cabinet by the Cabinet's on the 3rd of June, so actually Cabinet would have taken the recommendations from feedback from the consultation prior to that. I'm happy to come and brief members of this panel on the contents of the ability to change at that point would be limited as it's actually had Cabinet approval on that.
So does the panel think it's too late to come to this meeting in June?
We need to know what's in it.
Just as a briefing document rather than
the next meeting is in July. So the opportunity to put anything into the LIP is today or next door.
I was just wondering, if I remember correctly, don't we have an extra special meeting arranged for the back end of May for this panel? Would there be space on that to have a look at anything to do with LIP? Because I know we've got the parking consultation on, but we could tack this item on to the end of that possibly, if that's something else. At least that then goes before the Cabinet meeting. We can have 2 bites of the comments on this one.
Well, the assistant members of the panel are very happy to circulate the draft document that will take on any comments. As I say, it was the 12th of April that the public consultation closed. So happy to circulate the report outside of the meeting and take any comments from members prior to the final production of the document going forward to Cappagh. And then happy to come and brief members subsequently.
And take those comments to Cappagh.
As part of the consultation, happy to take the comments from
Is everybody
members.
happy that it'll come to the May meeting then? Started at the end of the meeting. Okay. That's agreed.
Can I just one comment? Sorry. So in terms of the Section 106 for Wimbledon Chase, although clearly it will not cover the full cost of accessibility, I would ask that the council ring-fenced all the Section 106 for that particular task for a number of years, hopefully acting as a catalyst for DFT, Network Rail, Thameslink, to do something like that.
Is that something we can do?
I can't prejudge the outcome of the recommendation, but we're able to do certainly intentions to seek some funding to do some feasibility work on that, whether that would require some or all of the Section 106. I think it would be for the planning application committee to determine more broadly the use of Section 106. The officer will certainly are seeking to have some feasibility work as part of the Section 106.
Okay.
Thank you. Section 4 of the report helpfully talks about further positive actions Merton could do, but when I read through this earlier, as did others, a lot of these actions appear to be things that other bodies do, like Network Rail, TfL, train companies. But there aren't many on this list that is specifically Merton-based, as in this council. So is there anything else that the council can be doing proactively to help this subject, rather than just other people?
The intention for officers is, with the accessibility funding from the LIP, to be flexible in that. Whilst there are organisations that do that as part of their core duties, the LIP funding can act as a catalyst to try help prioritise some of those activities within the borough. So we'd seek to use that in the most prudent way. As I say, with the South Western Trains money, there may be an opportunity to bring things forward that the LIP can support. There are elements there which would normally be as part of our Morden programme. So there are things about signage, about drop curbs, etc., which we would seek to do. But I think part of the main element I think you're asking is that we are in the front foot of what we want to achieve, and that will give us the opportunity when we're speaking to some of those statutory bodies or organisations that have a requirement to do it as part of their infrastructure to promote those within Merton, and see if any of our funding can act as a catalyst to support those works.
Is everybody happy to move on to any more questions? Thank you very much. Move on to Cappagh environmental permit. We've got first to look at, and you're going to read it. Welcome, Councillor Ormond's notes to the panel.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm just going to quickly read out the statement that Councillor Ormond wanted to raise. She can't be here, unfortunately, tonight due to family affairs that she has to take care of. So for the benefit of the video and the public, dear Councillor Attaway, please find a statement below from Councillor Ormond, etc. This came from our office. So she said, during my time as a councillor, I am deeply concerned by the lack of a full investigation into the incident at the Cappagh site last summer, which caused a vast quantity of dust to be discharged into the atmosphere and then into the Wandle River. I have raised this issue at Council, and the response from officers has been underwhelming and lacklustre. During the public consultation for the permit, there were 36 responses from local people and resident groups expressing their opposition to Cappagh being granted a B permit. I understand that due to an officer error, the permit was then issued. This of course meant that the decision could not be scrutinised and prevented members from expressing the concerns felt by the local community about the suitability of Cappagh to expand their operations. When a full investigation into these events was undertaken, Merton Council seemed content to fine Cappagh for not possessing the correct paperwork and continued to fail to address the lack of democratic representation of our residents. Following the investigation, steps need to be taken to ensure that such a situation does not occur again, and Merton Council needs to ensure that in future all activities of Cappagh and similar companies which have the potential to cause environmental damage are closely monitored, with immediate check be made to ensure that the paperwork is correct and up to date. This came from Council legal or not. So that's the background, and that's why basically it reports to the committee in its nutshell.
Thank you. We have two external speakers, two residents who've asked to speak at the meeting today, and Anne Lindsay and Nicola Thompson, both got 3 minutes. And do you want to?
I have lived just off Hayden's Road for almost 40 years, and in the last 3 to 4 years I have developed asthma, and I now am the owner of both a blue and brown inhaler with type in common usage. This hasn't developed by chance, it's a result of the general deterioration in air quality. Approving this permit is yet another step towards even worse pollution, which the council claim it is making efforts to avoid. Few local families use cars to get to school, so large numbers of children attending Garfield and Priory travel on foot or scooter. This reduces car usage with its obvious benefits to air quality and should be healthier for the children. But the children are being subjected to unsafe levels of NO2. The EU maximum recommended level is 40 micrograms, but readings in the area are consistently higher, generally around 50 or even 60. Whilst the council claims that it's addressing this issue, I see no evidence of you tackling the high volume of lorries, the main culprits, many of which belong to companies like Cappagh and the like. The deep concern felt throughout the borough on this matter can be seen by reading objections to the ongoing concrete batching planning application. The notes made by the council officer dealing with this permit talks about perceived pollution and states that other such sites do not create pollution and operate a greater number of vehicles. Really? Is there documented evidence to that effect? Do you really believe these sites and their vehicles do not contribute to pollution? Residents take the view that this site, alongside the supposedly protected Wandle Trail, is now completely unsuitable for such work. In recent years, approval has been given for a large residential development on the corner of Plough Lane and Dirtsford Road. Current NO2 readings are 50 micrograms. You've also approved another large development in Plough Lane. Readings here are a dangerously high 65. Stand on any of these roads around 8:30 in the morning and you will see streams of young children and parents walking to school as lorries thunder past. The air is toxic. The new flats mean more children walking along Havens Road, with more to come in a couple of years. Many children avoid the traffic by taking the Wandle path parallel to Waterside Way and are affected by the pollution there. The council should be ensuring that the Wandle path remains a clean, peaceful sanctuary and not encouraging more industry and pollution. Local plan submissions suggest it is time to redesignate Waterside Way for light industrial usage. One sentence. For the sake of our children, this cannot come soon enough, and revoking this permit would be a good indication that the council does put the residents' health first.
for the opportunity to address this meeting. Let me focus on the permit, which is the subject of this call-in. The whole process of approving this permit has been a farce. Firstly, it was published prematurely before documents were available online, apparently in error. Secondly, I have been told that permits of this type rarely attract a single objection. There were 36 objections to this one. There was no procedure in place to deal with them. Thirdly, even after this permit had been signed, reassuring emails were being sent by senior council officers saying it would be dealt with as a key decision and listed on the forward plan. They had no idea it had already been approved, despite the fact this had occurred some 10 days earlier. Does this fill me with confidence it's been properly considered? No. I have reams of email correspondence on this issue and the dust emission event of June 2018, which led to submission of this permit application. All can be summed up as follows. Me and various councillors saying, sorry to bother you, but please tell me what's going on. Council officers, meanwhile, coming up with contradictory responses from numerous departments, including environmental health, regulatory, the FOI and the SLLP. As I see it, there are three things you can make happen. 1. A procedure needs to be implemented for consideration of environmental permits. I find it incredible this is not already in place. 2. This permit needs to be revoked for proper consideration. I've been given the officer notes regarding the application. They are not dated, there is no author, and they contain simple errors. They fail to address the issue of operator competence, which is in question following the dust emission accident. They fail to acknowledge omissions in the application form. The report before you at 3.4 states, regulations under which the Council issues environmental permits only allow consideration of this plant and activities and operations relating or associated with it. This too is incorrect. DEFRA guidance states the operator's management systems, technical competence and compliance history must be considered. None of these get a mention in the officer notes. Were these notes written by the same officer who asserts by email to residents, and I quote, "Whilst I consider the applicant's submission, I do not base my decision on other representations made." And elsewhere, "I do not allow my representation to be influenced by external groups." If an officer who deliberately chooses to discount external views had any role in approving this permit, then it needs to be reconsidered. DEFRA guidance is clear. The authority cannot predetermine the outcome and must take account of any new information that emerges from the consultation. 3. At the very minimum, wording of this permit, which refers to concrete batching activities rather than the cement loading which was sought, needs revising. Given that the Council is currently fighting a planning appeal against its correct refusal of concrete batching on the site next door, it beggars belief that one of the Council's own officers is giving tacit approval for such activity on this site. As residents, all we want to know is that proper procedures are in place and are properly followed. It appears in this case they are not. I find this deeply concerning and hope your scrutiny will help rectify what looks like a chaotic situation. Thank you. I've also been advised that I was okay to hand out copies of my statement, as long as I brought one for every councillor, so if you don't mind.
Could I ask what your name is so that when we...
Sorry, my name is Nicola Thompson. I live locally.
Right, thank you. Just in case you've got questions.
Chair, I'll say a few words if I could just before handing over to you. So, before I hand over to the environmental health officers who deal with the crux of the matter in terms of the permitting and the process and the legislation that surrounds this, I really just wanted to apologise to members and to the public because the process that we agreed with members to deal with this permit application wasn't followed. And we're looking at why that happened at the moment, so we have an internal investigation to find out what went wrong. And we have very good procedures for dealing with environmental permitting, but this generated a level of public interest which was beyond anything we'd seen before, and so we agreed a different process to deal with it. And we didn't manage to bring it in front of members before that decision was taken. And it's helpful that we've got the opportunity tonight to look at that permit and consider whether there are any matters which weren't taken into consideration. And there are powers available to revoke permits, and we'll see whether there is any evidence to support such a step. But it's important to recognise that we're dealing with the environmental permitting tonight, and as a member of the public mentioned, there is a live appeal against the planning decision. It's probably important that we don't stray into discussion of that, particularly in a public forum, because that matter will be dealt with elsewhere by a planning inspector, and we're focusing solely on the planning permitting, the environmental permitting process this evening. So I do like to apologise and hand over to Alistair and Jason to address the issues of the process we undertake in order to assess environmental permits and how that was applied in this instance.
Thank you. Chair, members, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Alistair Brown. I'm the Residential Pollution Manager for the Regulatory Services Partnership, which covers Merton, Richmond and Wandsworth councils. Maybe just by way of introduction, I can just give a brief summary of the report and then I can just open it out for questions. But the report refers, as Mr. Lee said, refers to the permit and the environmental permit was issued. The permit is for the scope and installation and the activity around the horizontal silo, which is at Unit 8 on the Cappagh site, and this is for the unloading of bulk cement. It did go out to public consultation, and we did receive 36 responses, all of which were objections to the granting of the permit. I think probably the objections and the comments that came back from members of the public during that consultation process could probably fall into two camps, one of which was about the management of Cappagh and the perception of a lack of management, and the second category would have been around the potential for dust pollution in relation to the use of the silo. The rest of the report gives some of the thinking, I suppose, behind the decision making around the granting of the permit. The permit was granted. Obviously the objections were taken into consideration. The granting of the permit means that for this particular plant on the site, that is for the horizontal silo, it means that there are now a number of conditions attached to the permit, and those conditions allow us to address some, indeed many, of the issues that were raised by objectors around management issues and indeed around emissions, record keeping and such like. So the granting of the permit is very much a legal process. It does mean, of course, that if there's any contravention of any of the conditions attached to the permit, that the council, as the regulator in this particular occasion, are able to take enforcement action. So any issues in the future, therefore, can be addressed through a legal process that we do have now in place because of this permit. So I'm happy to take any questions.
So, Cappagh's process, has it always required a permit to do what it was doing in either the vertical or the horizontal silo? Has it always required a permit to do that?
Yeah, just for clarity, there's two silos on the site, one of which is a vertical silo. It's a disused silo, it's on Unit 12, and the other is the horizontal silo, which is in Unit 8, and this is the subject of the permit. The vertical unused silo does not require a permit because it's not been used. The other one, yeah, it does obviously now have that permit in place. It's been there for a number of years. It has never caused, we as a council, we as the regulator, were not aware that this silo actually existed until we went to the site during the investigation of the dust incident that Nicola Thompson referred to. On inspection of the site, we found the silo to be there, and therefore we advised Cappagh at that point that it required a permit. It's a process that should have a permit, require a permit, and Cappagh then therefore applied for the permit.
So sorry to interrupt on that. So Cappagh, being an international company, being a public company, I imagine, well aware of the laws, it isn't about you as an authority having to go to them to say you need a permit. My understanding this is criminality, and Cappagh as an organisation, the first thing they should require to do this is to ask you for a permit before they start. Is that correct?
For a process that's covered by the legislation, it should be permitted. In fact, they didn't have a permit. As to why they didn't have a permit, you'd have to ask Cappagh that. To be perfectly honest, obviously we have. They've never applied, and therefore we've now granted a permit.
So just one last thing on this then. But I don't understand that, because if somebody is breaking the law and they are a public limited company fully aware of all the issues legally, that is not for you to say to them, this isn't right. It is for them to apply for a permit. So my next and last question on this, therefore, when they did come to you, or you went to them, you should have prosecuted them, and number one, and secondly, is this a criminal offence for not having a permit?
Yeah, the council is the regulator here, so 2.10 in the report does refer to this. So it makes clear the site had operated a horizontal pile without a permit. The Regulators Code, which was issued by the Department of Business Innovation and Skills in 2014, gave advice to regulators in these kind of circumstances. And it was very much about supporting compliance with the legislation as opposed to enforcing any historical issues. Cappagh did immediately rectify or seek to rectify the issue. They were aware, or they became aware, that they were failing to operate without a permit, and they did very quickly apply and indeed employed a consultant who helped them with the application process. So we were happy with the response, and I think that was appropriate in terms of the Regulators Code.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor Dean's question, really, at paragraph 3.3, it's noted that no matters were raised by residents to justify the refusal to grant a permit. So I wonder if you could outline what matters would justify the refusal to grant a permit. And then to come back to paragraph 8, which notes in its third paragraph that it's an offence to operate a Part B process without a permit. I wondered what action the council as regulator took in response to that, above and beyond asking them to apply for a permit, and if that's relevant at all to consideration of granting a permit. Thank you.
Can I maybe just take that question first, and then I'll pass across to Mr. Andrews to speak to the issue around which conditions might be appropriate. I think that's more or less repeating, I think, what we've just said. We are aware that a permit should have been in place for this particular process. However, as we said under 2.10, the Regulators Code suggested we support compliance, and therefore it was appropriate that we encouraged Cappagh to apply for a permit, which they immediately did. We were happy with that response.
Sorry, more specific, my specific question was really, is the fact that a permit hadn't been applied for at all relevant in your consideration of whether to grant a permit?
Sorry. The question was, sorry?
They hadn't applied for a permit. Is that at all relevant in your consideration of whether to grant a permit when they did? They operated for a number of years without, and then they did apply. Is that at all a relevant consideration in whether to grant?
It would have been relevant in respect of if it gave us maybe a lack of confidence in the management. We obviously applied conditions in relation to the management of the silo in the future, and therefore we were happy that the conditions would take care of any concerns we might have had.
So perhaps I can expand on some of those answers. Finding an industry as part of our routine regulatory inspections that doesn't have permits in place for certain processes is unfortunately quite common, and that can be across the industry, including quite large-scale constructors. The licensing agenda isn't black and white. There's things called triviality clauses, and some people think that they may not need a permit for a certain activity. And in addition, the law and the permit pricing allows for regulators to levy an additional fee. It's such a common activity that the permit license process allows us to issue a levy or an additional fee for unlicensed premises. So it is quite common. And in terms of prosecution, we would generally need to show that that particular permit, that particular process has caused an environmental issue, and that environmental issue has been continuing, and it's of significant harm. Now, when we visited the site, this was a permit that was found, this was a silo that was found purely by accident, and the officer was satisfied that it was best to permit this activity and control it with conditions than to prosecute.
Okay, so Chris mentioned that apologies for not actually bringing this to the correct procedure. That was agreed. So my point is, when can we expect a outcome from that internal review? And secondly, what process can be put in place to make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen again, slip through the net? We have procedures in planning and in licensing. How come we don't have any here, and isn't it about time we do?
Well, really, that's a matter for the review that's underway at the moment, and I haven't got a timescale for that conclusion. And it may well be that review identifies improvements we can make in process. But that hasn't concluded yet, and I can't put a timescale.
You've mentioned that once applied for, the permit was granted. Could you talk me through the process that was made once the permit was applied for, between applying for the process and granting the permit?
Once the officers have identified an activity that needs to be licensed, they will then request that the applicant put in an application for that process. That application then gets reviewed by the officer to make sure that it's duly made and they've answered the environmental questions. And in some cases we go to public consultation, and in this case, because there was interest and there was an incident of dust on the site, we went to public consultation. Generally, that officer makes his decision under delegated powers in accordance with the environmental permitting guidance, and they will decide based on the information that they're given whether or not to grant the permit. They will think about things such as, has this got a history of causing a problem? Is it a significant environmental impact? And then they would normally make their decision. In this case, I think there was a commitment that because there was such public interest to hear this more openly, but I think that's part of the process this is referring to. But the process is set out by DEFRA guidance, and the officer follows that. And that's a normal process. It's quite normal that these applications happen day in, day out as normal business, and the officer makes that decision as under delegated powers.
Thank you. What evidence would have justified refusal to grant this permit?
A number of things. If the officer found that silo had not been operated properly, or that there was, let's say, dust incidents and complaints linked to that particular activity, and I understand that there are other activities on the site that did cause concern, but he has to focus on the licence application for that particular silo. If they found something wrong that was not being used, or there was a history of complaints, or there was emissions from that silo, then they would have reconsidered the decision.
Yeah, just to expand on that point, then, it does kind of go back to the management for me then, because surely if they manage to manage one silo that's obviously not to do with the permit there, should that not have some sort of effect on your decision making on this silo, not just the operation of that silo?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the dust incident last June which was referred to, you could have that as indicative of good management. It was, as far as we're aware, it was a one-off incident. It was fairly short duration, it was limited. We do understand that it was due to an error which involved a contractor as well as the Cappagh themselves. And it led basically to the road tanker driver connecting a hose to a silo which is now unused that we spoke about earlier on, the vertical silo. That was an error, it shouldn't have happened, but it did happen, but it was a fairly short duration one-off incident. Since then, Cappagh have taken steps to prevent such an accident happening again with that particularly unused silo. So we don't anticipate future problems with that particular silo. The other silo, of course, now has got a permit in place, and therefore there's conditions attached to the use of that particular silo. So we would not, as long as the conditions are adhered to, and if they're not, we can obviously take enforcement action. But if those conditions are adhered to, then we can anticipate the correct use of the silo which now has a permit.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, according to 3.6, how often are you planning to check and monitor these sites, please?
It's generally risk assessed. We've already carried out 2 inspections of the site because obviously we're a little bit concerned about compliance. I would expect the officer to visit probably twice a year. Depends. If there's complaints, then we'll visit straight away. If there's concerns, then obviously we'll chase that up. If we find anything on site that we feel is in contrary to the licence, then we'll obviously consider review of that licence. But we will respond to any complaints and we will have it as a routine inspection on site.
Thank you. Could I, Chair, query the process, the legal process for tonight? I understand that the officer can consider whether there are grounds to review. I just wondered what the threshold an officer has to think has been met to do so tonight.
I think essentially the process of granting a permit is covered by legislation. So any review of a permit would have to make sure it was done within the terms of that legislation. As a regulator, we have responsibilities, we have a statutory duty, and therefore we'd expect to just comply with what the legislation says. So any review, revocation or anything to do with the permit after it's granted will have to be in terms of that legislation.
I don't have a question, I have some comments, if I'm allowed to ask comments. I didn't get an answer in terms of the criminality, which says to me that this clearly seems to come under criminal prosecution. And if that's the case, I still don't understand why the council is not prosecuted. Prosecutions don't, have a sell-by date on them. The council should prosecute for not having a permit when one is required. It's the odds of the incident occurring when somebody happened to be there being the only time is a coincidence. And that could well be true. It could have been the only error that happened. But it may not be. And I'm not convinced that there is enough time spent on this particular site. So first of all, I think that this panel should consider asking the officers to propose a criminal prosecution. And secondly, I think that this area clearly has some air quality issues. And if this council is true to its word when it comes to air quality, we need to see that the whole area, in particular around this cement site, has less than 40 milligrams of NO2 consistently across the whole year. In day part, on day, on season, through different weather and throughout the year. But if those two things aren't happening, really the whole prosecution system, the whole policy of air quality is just a complete sham. Something has to happen here, because this to me sounds very serious.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to whether the council would prosecute or not, and I haven't considered this further to the file of evidence and detail, but what I heard from the officers, which isn't unusual, is that in their regulatory and enforcement approach, they decided to refer to in 2.10, which is a support to operators when that is appropriate. And I think the officers said that in this instance they felt rather than prosecute, the best alternative was to regulate the plant and get conditions on it for future usage. Usually when you prosecute again, there is a sell-by date on many offences in terms of, again, I've not looked at the detail of this, but I suspect it would be a prosecution at magistrate's court, which will have a time limit on it of something like 12 months. I don't know for sure in this case, but it wouldn't surprise me. And secondly, the CPS Prosecutors Code would also require that the authorities take into account the public interest in that prosecution. And again, from what I've heard this evening from the officers in terms of get regulation in place, it is the alternative to prosecution, and I suspect that's the decision that was taken.
Thank you, Chair. 3.4, where it states, many of the objections received relate to the use of in site in general. The permit application was only for a single plant within the site. That for horizontal silo. If that's the case, what's happened to the rest of the area where these objections are coming from? What's happening there?
Again, as we said earlier, the permit can only cover the operation of that particular piece of plant that was the subject of the permit. Many of the objectors did talk about the use of the site and how they felt it was in an inappropriate place, that they were unhappy with the site being there. However, we've got to work within the terms of the regulations, and the regulations were clearly only asking us to consider the permit and the use of this particular piece of plant, in this case a horizontal silo. And therefore the case officer, when he or she is making their decision as to whether to grant or not, will only take into consideration what is the subject of the permit. The other issues around the use of the site or its impact on the local environment and the local area cannot necessarily be picked up during the consideration of that particular permit.
Going back to what Nicola said when she was speaking about this issue, she said the permit was cited there and needs revising. I don't see any reason why that can't happen. Is there a reason why we can't revise it and add in various extra things?
I think if I've understood Nicola Thompson correctly, she was talking about the discussion as to whether we describe it as concrete or cement. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm referring to basically something obviously went wrong on the site, and we need to make sure that it does that again, and therefore we need to tighten up the regulation if we can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously the permit's now granted, it's got conditions, that's what the conditions do. It gives us the tools, if you like, to be able to enforce Cappagh to do certain things in the future if we're not unhappy with their performance. So the conditions are about how they manage this particular process in the future. It is about the emissions that come off this particular piece of equipment in the future. And it is about things like our record keeping and their performance. So, as Mr Andrews said earlier, we will be doing inspections on a regular basis, and we'd expect full compliance with all of those conditions. If not, then we will use enforcement powers to ensure compliance.
Oh, well, I've got a recommendation made, and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Panel welcomes this opportunity to raise issues about the need to improve accessibility in the borough and welcomes the attempt by officers to access funding to address the work required. Sorry. Oh yeah, well we just said we want to recommend that we monitor, put in measures to monitor the police, the impact of air quality or noise disturbance, and to review the permit and the conditions, and have the defunct silo clearly labelled, never to be used again, so that other future members of staff do not make that mistake again.
Chairman, I think you're going in the right direction. I just feel that it's not going to answer what the two issues are here. One is that they were acting without a permit. Regardless of the interpretation of the law, they know there's a regulatory authority here, and at no stage have they spoken to that authority. And I don't think that goes far enough in that respect. And then the second thing is we have a known NO2 issue specifically in this area. And this area needs to be cleaned up with or without the site owners.
We are scrutinising the silo, not the vehicle emissions.
I just don't want to be part of...
Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, it's the permit.
Yes,
I don't want to be part of something where there won't be any change. I don't want to say no to that because it's moving in the right direction. If we do, I don't think anything's going to change. It's up to everybody else, I understand that.
Okay. Have you got a suggestion?
I've got a suggestion that may okay, Councillor Dean a bit. We've got regulation in planning and various other things. We don't seem to have any regulation in environmental health. Is it possible that we could say if there are six responses to an application that it comes to this panel or cabinet here?
Chair, that was essentially the process that we sought to agree in relation to this matter of public interest. And it's helpful that we're getting the opportunity this evening. Having spoken to the environmental health officers, I don't think there's anything that's being raised this evening which suggests that the permit was incorrectly issued. Certainly on the matter that Councillor Dean refers to in terms of vehicle movements, that's a matter completely out with the permit itself. We're permitting a particular piece of plant, not the vehicle movements that create the NO2 that move. Whilst that is a serious matter, it's completely separate to the matter of the environmental permit. And I think the officers will confirm there's nothing we've heard this evening which suggests that the permit wasn't lawfully issued. And to take other matters into consideration wouldn't be in the interest of the council or this committee.
Chair, I would say that I'm very happy for officers to deal with this. I think officers have experience, They have the education, they have the training, they have the law on their side, they have the knowledge. It's not for this group of individuals who have none of that to make these decisions. And the decision should have been taken by the experts, and the decision was not taken by the experts. So to give it to us, who have no understanding of the law, is not right. I think it needs to be for the officers to do their job. I'm not criticising individuals here, and I'd hate a witch hunt to happen. It would be the worst case, because they're not the culprits. The culprits are somewhere else, and the officers should not be blamed, and this committee should not be forced into a position where they have to take responsibility. We should focus on where the culprit is.
Well, I actually agree with Mr. Macon on this one. I think there is a need to have a proper process in place to satisfy our own needs and also that of the public for accountability and democratic oversight. And that's something that we're big fans of here. We already have a plan in, and the public actually respects and accepts that. We also have a licensing, and we possibly have a new areas as well where things can go to certain committees. But it turns out that environmental matters go nowhere, and that seems to be a flaw in the system. And if some of the emails are true, what I've seen written by Navy officers to the public, it doesn't read very well, and there needs to be oversight there. So I think one recommendation from this panel should be to authorise officers to set up a proper process with councillor input, either this committee or cabinet or a new committee, whatever it may be, that every time there's an application we get notifications of them, a bit like we do for planning. If there's a sufficient interest, it gets called into the committee, and then we're all confident that things are done correctly. And then most of the time will be done under delegated, like it is in planning already. So I just think there needs to be that equity there, and I think that should be a form of recommendation of this panel.
Can I just ask, isn't that the normal procedure? Because it was just an administrative error that didn't come to for planning, it would have come.
The environmental permitting process is delegated to officers to deal with in the way that Councillor Dean described.
Yeah.
And we deal with a huge volume of these as a matter of course. In this particular instance, because of the level of public interest, we agreed with members that we would bring it in front of the committee at the point that the decision was to be made, so that transparency could be applied. I think the discussion is leading us to a point where we might wish to review how we make those decisions and at what level those matters should be brought into a committee rather than being dealt with by officers. And I'm happy to take that away to explore. I haven't got the answer this evening, but happy to look at whether our process for oversight.
So there is a recommendation.
Can we agree what was specified by Chris? That sounds like a way forward, and it satisfies what I wanted, and it satisfies what Councillor Holden said.
I'm happy to support what Dan and Russell are suggesting, but my question was more, I think I heard in the recommendation you read out that we would request officers to review the decision. I just wondered what process, what would happen next if we were to pass that recommendation.
I think we would have to pick up on any new information that might influence the decision making of the case officer. So the committee report sets out like the thinking of the case officer when he or she made the decision to issue the permit, grant the permit. If you brought forward anything new this evening, then it would allow us to go away and review that decision making. I don't think there has really been anything that's particularly new tonight. It's been obviously been picked up on many of the areas which are causing concern for members and indeed for constituents. However, I'm not too sure that in actual fact there's going to be anything that's new that's going to allow us to change the permit and the conditions that are attached to it at the current time. I think the conditions which are there will cover any issues of concern at the present time, and it's up to us as a regulator to make sure that we enforce as necessary and just make sure that those conditions are adhered to, which I think we'll be happy enough to do.
To so I think it's really important that the members are aware when a permit is issued, after 20 days there is an ongoing power for the council to review and vary and revoke. So any permit that's issued at any time, if the officers feel there is new evidence come to light which means the permit might need to be varied, or might need to be strengthened, or might need to be revoked, or administered in any of those different ways, then that power is there continuously. It's not just about the evidence that's available this evening.
Chair, one last thing on that. This committee has no legal jurisdiction over licences.
No.
And planning and licensing has a quasi-legal position where councillors can revoke and they cannot hear. So if we said, please prosecute these people and we all vote for tonight, you're not going to do it. So why on earth are you asking us? This is why we shouldn't be doing this. We have no position, it's just a smoke screen as a cover to say that the councillors agree with us. I just don't accept it.
So, but we do want to make a recommendation that it comes to this panel if you have X amount of public interest in your subject.
I'm happy to go away and explore what the best way would be.
Is everybody happy? Is there another committee that you wish for?
Happy to go away and explore which committee and what process.
Sorry, can I ask, given the officer's kindly outlined that basically he doesn't feel any new evidence has been presented tonight, that we are able to point residents in the direction of an explanation of what would constitute relevant evidence, and give them an opportunity to present that before you make your review?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was evidence that the silo, which is the subject of the permit, was not being used appropriately, let's say, for example, there was dust emissions that was coming from on a regular basis, then that would certainly be evidence that we would use in any potential future enforcement. So, I mean, obviously the residents don't always know what's going on within the site. However, something like a dust cloud is quite visual, and I'm perfectly sure that we will get phone calls if that was to happen. The onus is us as a regulator to make sure we go down and we apply any conditions that are attached to that permit. There are conditions around dust emissions, and therefore we would be responding to any complaints that we get in the future.
And is it appropriate if the Commission, they have the disused silo clearly labelled so that you look at the number of staff
It's not the subject of this particular permit. However, as part of that whole investigation of the dust incident that took place last June, they have put steps in place to make sure that silo, this used silo, the one that should not have been used and was used in error, cannot be used in future. So I believe it's gated and locked off now.
One of the recommendations made by Nicola is that at very minimum this permit which was signed in error needs revising. Does anybody, is that something that can be done?
The permit was issued in error. Say that again.
At very minimum, this permit which was signed in error needs revising, but I think that's what you were dealing with, aren't you? And you have done it. Oh, right. Well, nowhere in the application does it refer to concrete batching, yet the permit is approved for concrete batching.
Yeah, we have taken legal advice on this. The word concrete does appear once within the permit. The permit is clearly about cement batching, so therefore we're happy that in actual fact the permit has been correctly applied. It is potentially, if we were to review at a future date, then we could take out the word concrete and make sure it only ever said cement. But from a legal perspective, we're happy that permit was correctly applied, and we have taken legal advice about the use in error of that one word concrete.
Do it then.
One more question.
Well, I thought you'd gone to recommendations.
Does the conditions that you've specified include movements to from the site? Or are we just talking about the silo and that's it?
It only refers to the use of the silo, so it doesn't talk about things like traffic movement, for example.
Traffic going to the silo with what they're doing.
No, it only refers to the operation of the silo.
I just want to make one more point about this legality. You know, are we going to be comfortable? Are we going to be responsible if we I mean, careful what you wish for. If you want to put permits in front of this committee, don't think you're going to get your way, because you're not. And, you know, are we going to be taken to court by these big organisations who say, look, we have a perfectly legitimate business here, and you've stopped us, and DEFRA and all of the guidelines say that we can do this. There's nothing you can do to stop us, but you bunch of people have no knowledge, skills, or legal credibility have overturned this.
Could I add to Councillor Dean's point in the fact that the reason Councillor Holden and myself want to put in front of the committee is not necessarily to make the decision is in the hands of officers, that's correct, but it opens it out to the public, and the public are aware of what's going on the site, especially on this application where there were 30 objections. It would give those 30 people an opportunity to hear why the decision has been made and what the reason is. I'm not saying for 1 minute that we make the decision, as in planning we make the decision. I'm not suggesting that, I'm suggesting that it is put here and so that it's in the open and the public can hear what's going on.
Chris said he would be a good invite committee to look at unnecessarily coming here to be legislation to be made. Is everybody clear about that? Next one is the Merton education.
Who's happy recommendation?
Oh, sorry, okay, so the recommendation is, can I formally say that we, we will take away the recommendation to look into it to see, whether we come to this committee or a committee, so we had a lot of complaints about.
What I'm hearing, Chair, is that you want us to review how we ensure we get proper oversight and public transparency of the decisions which attract a lot of public interest.
Yeah,
that's entirely doable. We'll find a way to do that and bring that back in contact.
And the necessary recommendation to make sure that the family side is not used.
I think
I'll second it. I'll move it.
Okay, just
I'll move it.
Is everyone
Chair, can I just say I'm very, very happy.
Sorry, the point is, did we ask Jason?
Yeah.
So I've got to bit that.
Yes, it's all which is Merton learning.
Okay, so the report outlines the progress made with the adult learning services moving to a commission model of service. As a commission model, as a commission model of service utilising the best providers in the field, we've achieved our aims of financial sustainability and in developing the curriculum to make it more skills-based to develop the social, economic and health outcomes of our residents. The report's been summarised under the Ofsted key lines of inquiry headings to reflect our response to the last inspection. And we can report that good progress is being made with the actions identified in the last inspection, and we're expecting another inspection from Ofsted likely to be within the next 6 months. I'd also highlight in the report and to the panel about the changes to within the devolution of funds from the Education and Skills Funding Agency to the GLA and the Mayor's Office, and the publish of the Mayor's London's Skills Strategy, which outlines the kind of future thinking around further education and adult and community learning. The new funding arrangements will be in place from the 2019-20 academic year, and we're just working in embedding those kind of new changes and processes. And at present, particularly in year one, we don't anticipate any major significant changes to service delivery as a result of that. So that's the point. Is there any questions?
That's all I'll say. That the service has been getting better and better. You say we're looking forward to Ofsted in 6 months' time?
Potentially, it could be any time within the next 6 to 8 months, really. It could in effect be next week, depending on when the phone calls come.
I think I'm placing all this on schools, but are you aware that there is a new Ofsted framework, and what would your estimation be as to how it's faring?
So we're fully prepared for the new the education inspection framework. We're in an unusual situation because we may actually be inspected under either framework depending on when the inspection is. I think the main changes within the new framework particularly focus around the kind of the quality within the classroom, particularly about the starting and finishing of learning points or learner points within the classroom. So, and actually a lot of the work that we've been doing, regardless of the framework, is actually around that work. So we feel we're well prepared. I think we probably welcome as well maybe a little less emphasis on the data side or the data analysis within the new framework, which actually had a bit of a bearing on our last inspection actually. Maybe just looking a bit more individual learner starting points. So we've been doing a lot of work around that. As I said, we are in an unusual position because we may be inspected under either framework, but we think regardless of whichever framework we are inspected under, we're ready.
Just one comment is that my daughter signed off for one of the courses last week and got a phone call on Monday morning saying, "Why didn't you turn up?" I was quite impressed with that. even though we told the person that we weren't going to be in the country. But they still phoned up on Monday morning to find out where she was.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. And a couple of quick questions. The first one was there's some references in the report to how commissioning enables effectively more flexibility and a better ability to adapt the curriculum. There's some references in 1.3 to developing sophisticated evidence-based approaches. And I wondered if you could give some examples of that and how it's different from an in-house model. My second question was a very quick one, which was, is there anything in the commissioning that you've done that is linked to where the courses have to be provided? Because some of the providers have campuses outside Merton.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to start with around the model, I mean, what we have at our disposal is that we can specify quite clearly what courses or what new kind of emerging trends we would like to see within the field. So I think it does give us that ability to be more nimble. I think the challenge when you're an in-house provider, and particularly for the old college, the challenge was particularly about managing within its own kind of financial purse strings. And a lot of that led to going to see kind of, we could say, more kind of full fee earning courses, so kind of desirable courses that those with the right amount of money at their disposal could pay for, and not necessarily really addressing kind of some of the key kind of skills issues that we have in the borough. So this gives us that kind of mixed model to be able to say, we can still enable all of that to happen, but also to be a bit more flexible and to actually use expert training providers instead of trying to utilise the skills within a sole college to do that. So practical examples we would give in terms of where we've been able to bring in expertise and really change up the curriculum in quite a way. So we're commissioning an organisation at the moment called Viability. They're doing a programme around, in effect, young people of 18 to 25 who are seeking careers in professional football, for example, who haven't quite made it, still want to remain in the sport or within sport, and looking at retraining and reskilling around that. We've got an example as well of some provision we've done in the Gables, working collaboratively with our adult social care colleagues, where we really managed to really specify a different model within that. So the actual training happens on the supported living centre site, and it's very much about supporting the residents to live more independent lifestyles and live freer, fuller lives. And also some training actually for the support workers that are on there, and really practical things about how to use the kitchen on site, how to travel, how to do things that really make a difference on a day instead of going to a kind of a more remote site where they're learning, but then it's difficult to practically apply some of that learning back to where they are. And probably the final example I'd give is just some of the work that we're doing with kind of our early years colleagues as well at the moment, which is particularly well around kind of entry level ESOL provision. At the moment, most of the provision historically has been designed around kind of entry levels 1, 2 and 3, but there is a real need for that kind of first step provision. So again, we've been able to tailor a specific provision around that to deliver that, which would have been more challenging within the old models of service and working with the existing cohorts of tutors we have. So that's the difference around the in-house model and the examples. There was another question, was there? Sorry.
Yeah, is there anything in your commissioning about where
and that was just the other thing to add, that within and as agreed by Cabinet when we moved to the commissioning model of service, all of the provision is delivered in the borough. So although we commission organisations such as South Thames Group, Richmond and Hillcroft Adult and Community College, whilst their main provision is outside of the borough, all of the courses that are commissioned under this contract, under this service, are delivered within the borough.
I just want to say thank you for your report, and not only that, thanks for all the services that have been delivered within our borough, and for example for youth centres, the libraries, all these spaces have been used up and used in the right way. And not only that, looking out for further spaces to engage the community into taking responsibility and also work with every area. So personally for me, in Palazzil, I noticed in our library it has been well used. I mean, we have quite a lot of volunteers who are happy to volunteer in the library, and other services within the library, which of course a few years ago it wasn't there. So I just want to say thanks a million for all the hard work, you and your staff and everyone put together.
I've just got one more question. 2.9 talk about leadership and management and an advisory panel consisting of members and officers. The member presumably is the cabinet member, is it, for Merton Library? 2.9. There is. 2.29? It's on page 35.
Oh, sorry. It's about governance structures.
Yeah, it's about structures and who the member is. The member is the cabinet member, presumably?
Yes, yeah. So the current representation is the cabinet member that sits on the advisory panel, along with different representatives from chair of the Chamber of Commerce on there, representatives from MBSC and the business community.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about Para 2.5, which is also on page 35. It says in priority wards, more learners are enrolling on courses and achievement is increased. When I look at Para 2.26, the number of unique learners has increased, but equally so has the retention rate fallen. And I wondered if there was more detail on how that showed that more learners in priority wards were involved.
Sure. So there's a level of detail within this. So this is just a summary of our own performance. What we do each year, and it's published online, as well as we produce a self-assessment report, which goes into a lot more level of detail around where. So yes, we are seeing more learners from deprived, or what we designate as deprived wards, enrolling on courses. And what we do when we've done the analysis is, whilst our overall retention was down last year, we did note that retention and achievement within those designated deprived wards was up. So it's just really focusing the priorities, looking across the piece at some of the other areas as well.
Question on page 36, 2.26. Looking at the last line, average cost per learner, that seems a rather big jump, 374 this last year compared to 285 of the previous year, and way above the target. Is there a particular explanation for that?
There's a couple of reasons in particular. Things I'd particularly flag up was that in the previous year we hadn't utilised our full grant. So this last year we did utilise our full allocation grant, which meant that some of the costs went up. I think what we did particularly in year one was we identified that some provision we needed to invest more money in. To bring up the provider market. When we initially went live with commissioning, we continued to deliver our learners with learning difficulties and disabilities provision in-house. Getting feedback from the market, we've invested more into that, and that's brought the price up. But also as well, we've invested in some one-off expenditures really to maximise the grant last year. So we mentioned about the issues with our previous Ofsted inspection, so we brought in some additional consultancy support to support with our preparedness for that, which seems to be really, really paying off at the moment. And we also invested in the management information system, which again is a one-off cost, which will mean that we can better analyse our data and have our data prepared in a better way to again make us more prepared and to better analyse and feed into some of that strategic thinking about how we develop our evidence base and how we commission more smartly in the future. So kind of a lot of one-off costs within there which have brought it up, and we would expect that to come down for this year.
Very quickly, just on that, I wondered how that figure compared with when Merton was a direct provider.
So we can confidently say that it was definitely quite considerably less, and the reason I say that is because we know that in 2017-18 we had more learners and enrolments than last year of the college, and the college, I believe, in the last year, we need to look back, I believe it was about £550,000 overspent. So we're on at 1.34 million, would be considerably more with that taken into consideration. So just to present the annual libraries report for 2018-19, on the first page of the report just highlights the key projects that have been delivered over the last year, and I'll just kind of summarise some of the key things around that. So firstly, we've kind of overhauled all our ICT infrastructure, both kind of customer-facing equipment that customers will use in science, such as public PCs, but also our background systems, our library management system, and we have launched a new website within the last month as well with some enhanced customer features, and there'll be more to develop and see over that over the next few months. So a big piece of infrastructure work that we feel has gone quite successfully, with more to come. We've feeding into kind of the next agenda item point as well, we've been continuing to expand our cultural offer in libraries, delivering a number of kind of high-profile theatre, music and arts events and exhibitions for our Merton art spaces. We continue with our work around making our libraries more dementia and autism friendly, and really working to support the council in terms of prevention and supporting people to live fuller and healthier lives, particularly around autism friendly work. That will be a big focus for the next year. We just received a grant, just had the confirmation through this morning, of £96,000 from Arts Council England to further deliver our services or develop our services for children with SEND, and that will focus around the Sensory Libraries project, which is referred to in the report. We'll continue to support the council in terms of channel shift and promoting assisted digital services work and providing staff and volunteers to be able to support people to get online and access services easier. There's also been a number of activities that have taken place within our heritage service. So the completion of the centenary events of World War I and the women's suffrage movement, but also to flag up that the Heritage Centre in its own right was 25 years last week, 23rd of April. There's a lot of activities and events around that, and one of the main kind of culmination events being on the 11th of May, which will be our annual Discovery Day event here. And as always, we continue to develop our offer for schools and continue to have a unique programme of unique membership scheme, which sees all of our children and young people enrolled in primary schools and high schools signed up to their library service with an enhanced programme of activities in place. In terms of our key KPIs and our performance for last year, we exceeded 5 of our KPIs. One we didn't meet, although there was an upward trajectory on the previous year, which was around visitor figures, which set quite a challenging target, which we didn't quite meet, but we think we're still well placed to continue to see improvement in terms of performance in that area. And there are still some of those indicators which are London, highest ratios in London. So, for example, our customer usage is still the highest customer to resident ratio of any London library service. So it's the annual library support.
So a question that page quality called 2.32. I noticed it says here you're looking at the idea of paying by mobile and possibly printing your own things to the printers. I think that is a very good innovation. The main query is how much will it cost?
So this service is actually live now, and it's live across all our sites. And in effect, there is no direct cost to us. So the way the provider provides this is that actually they just provide an admin fee for the infrastructure, so they take a little bit off the receipt of the income. But there's been no outlay in terms of cost, and we're still bringing an income stream from that, which we actually feel will probably be more healthier than what we're bringing in from the lines that we're using at the moment.
Thank you. I was wondering, Anthony, if you looked at the diversity of the library service users, and if you have any targets.
Yeah, so we don't actually have any specific targets around kind of age use. What we would do more is we would look at activity programs where there's underusage. Less likely to use libraries tend to be white British of working age, and we've done some particular focused programs around that. So particularly around the culture offer, a lot of our activities potentially appeal to that demographic, whilst also considering that we provide a broad range of services for all of the community. So there are plans underneath. We don't necessarily set specific targets. Our overall target is that usage one, which we, in order to contribute to that, we want to see a good proportion from all user groups.
Okay. Thank you. I was also thinking about accessibility in terms of the work we're doing on autism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's an area we can strengthen. I think, and some of this actually feeds into the work where there's crossover between the previous report around adult learning. So a number of the courses for learners with learning difficulties and disabilities are now delivered through libraries, and that's obviously having an impact in terms of usage, positive impact in terms of usage, and particularly around SEND schools. So whilst I mentioned that we've got a very, very good programme with primary and high schools, the SEND offer has been taken a little more while to devise and implement, but now we've got some really, really useful information. We've been working with a lot of groups within the borough, SEND groups, around what that offer looks like, what the kind of fabric and furniture and activities and services are. And with the funding we've just received now, we can really put those plans really into operation, and we should see a big increase within those groups.
I was pleased to know that you can borrow books from other boroughs' libraries as well. Can you use the other facilities in their libraries, and do you have to return the book to the same borough you borrowed it from?
So we're part of the London Libraries Consortium. We share our library management system across 16 boroughs in London at the moment. The consortium continues to expand. There's been a lot of interest nationally within the model that we've developed there. We've been talking to Arts Council and DCMSC colleagues about looking to scale that up further. But in simple terms, yes, you can return your books to any borough in the consortium. And borrow from either of those boroughs. It's a benefit to customers, because not necessarily where you live is where you're going to borrow. There might be a place of work, or you may be somewhere else. And also it just reduced down on some of our costs around choice and reservations, because it means that, instead of having a collection of 400,000 items accessible to Merton residents, we now have a catalogue that's over, I think about 6.5 million titles that are available.
Just a comment, and I think you do an excellent job over the years as well. I think everyone's very supportive of what you're doing, and I accept it's very difficult with SEND, but a lot of people that have somewhere to go Monday to Friday clearly don't have anywhere to go on Saturdays, and the more you're doing to encourage them to come into the libraries, to spend time in the libraries, connecting that with the education is very good, because clearly you know better than anybody when they get to a certain age, their parents are not always around, and then they just become very, very isolated. So it's a huge task, and I know you're doing well enough, and just, I think everyone would support you if you did more of it.
I mean, thank you very much, and I think it is something we're continuing to work on. I think also actually what we're seeing as well is that when we're analysing our uses, the trends are changing. So it's not mentioned in this report, but also actually around the age demographic of usage is changing quite considerably. So children are our highest proportion of users, but actually continually now young people is now becoming our second highest usage group, and that's up to age of 24 actually. And so when I was mentioning a bit more about how we refine the working age offer, there's a bit around that, and the continuing work we do with older groups as well. But particularly around that Saturday offer as well, we do layer in a lot of activity events, as we have a very active volunteering programme. Also we work very collaboratively with partners to put a lot of different programmes on within the libraries to continue to encourage people to use.
I'm going to ask this question, I hope I get the right answer. I know we have some brilliant staff at the libraries, but due to the people group that they have to support, how often do they go on training? And because sometimes our staff have to support people with emotional issues, different type of issues, what type of training do you provide for them?
Yeah, I mean we put a lot of emphasis on staff training, and we've kind of refined and relaunched our customer service standards last year. We updated our training programs and plans, and I wouldn't say increasingly, because I think there's always been this element, but you know, our libraries do present customers that sometimes have challenging behaviours. So we've specifically invested in training around that, particularly working on a piece as well around supporting some of our homeless users as well, and particularly about signposting and information and awareness around what we can do to support that group. And also as well, I mean, like I said, we've been doing a lot around our engagement with children and young people, which has also seen some beneficial outcomes as well. As I mentioned earlier, actually, the proportion of young people that are using us is very high, and that presents some challenges within its own rights around engagement with other groups. So we've been doing some particular focus work around all of our youth service colleagues around training and support there. And that continues to be refreshed each year and updated. So, you know, particularly like when we mentioned about the SEND work, that will come with staff training as well, to make sure that staff can better adapt and support those kind of groups too.
Thank you. This may be a question for you, Nick, anyway. Obviously, Crossrail 2, West Barnes Library. What Crossrail 2 may never come. What is the plan, and what will we do?
So obviously we've been in dialogue with the local residents and the Friends Association about those developments. We had to put on pause our redevelopment plans probably 2 years ago now, I think it was, because there was an indication that the site would have an impact on the development of the Crossrail 2 site. Since then, Crossrail 2 have been rethinking their plans. We had a meeting only a few weeks ago, which has given the strongest indication yet that we be in a position to be able to start moving forward with the redevelopment. What we will need to do though is unfortunately it wouldn't be just kind of starting again from where we left off. We'll have to go back and do some of the initial survey work and scoping work, just to determine the kind of scale and what can be achieved within there. But there's a positive indication now that actually, as opposed to it being dependent upon Crossrail 2, we could actually move forward and start to consider that redevelopment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say very, very quickly how incredibly proud I am to be involved with this service. Over the years I've seen it reach the kind of level it's at the moment, and if you look at those statistics on page 47, it's just incredible how well valued and well received our library service is. And I kind of, Anthony's already said it, but I invite you all to come and celebrate the Heritage Day on May 11th at the library here, because not just because it's a Heritage Day, because I'm very, very proud of what we achieved for our heritage, but it's also, I'm incredibly proud of the way that we use a library inside and outside to promote an amazing event like that. And I'm very proud that of the volunteers that we have, and the way that we use the volunteers. You'll see when you come to that day how the volunteers are interacting. That's tremendous. And actually, to an extent, this answers David Dean's point. You'll see how intergenerational that event, which used to be very much aimed towards senior citizens, how it has become far more intergenerational, and how whole families are all becoming to it. So I really do invite you to come along and celebrate alongside me. Thank you very much.
So we've got our annual volunteer celebration event is on, it'd be the Tuesday, is that the 12th of May? I'm just trying to remember, is it the 12th? It's Tuesday the 12th?
12th of May is a Sunday.
So it can't be the Sunday, it'd be the 14th of May then, which would be a Tuesday, which is in the art space at Wimbledon Libraries, and invite has gone to councillors.
Can you take the wishes of this committee with you and tell them how proud you are?
May I also say that one of our young people from Fullerton will be doing good Merton here. So, yes.
Thank you, Anthony, for your points. We all appreciate everything that you actually utilise for this. Now we're going to be
Thank you very much, Chair. You'll be really pleased tonight that I haven't come alone, which means that you're not going to have to listen to me. So, without further ado, the report's in front of you, but I'd like to introduce you to the real people that are delivering the London Borough of Culture on behalf of the Borough. Thank you.
Hello and thank you for having us. I'm Somaya Abia, Managing Director of Gigs, the software company across the road, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Culture Advisory Group, who's delivering the report of the programme that you have in front of you. I'll just cover quickly, conscious of the time you were spending in the meeting, I'll just quickly cover some key elements, which is basically what the Cultural Advisory Group consists of, why does it exist, and what's the aim of the group, and what's the current programme. So the group was formed by local businesses and artists and local volunteers, and chaired by one of our very active business people. Many of you know him, John Merriman, and you've got councillors and council officers as part of the group. So it's a partnership, something that is new to us as local businesses and local residents and local artists and that kind of demographic, and we have had a very, very great experience of working with the council on a project that is very, very exciting for us. So long-term goals, we would like to make an impact in the culture of the borough. We want to do other projects, and we want to be able to form a platform to increase volunteering, increase employment, increase cohesion in the community, and through all of that, through culture. And our first project, which was kindly and massively funded by the council and partially by the GLA, was the film Merton, consisting of item 232 on your report, if you want to look at. Consists of 5 different strands, so community film seasons, commissioning 4 new short films, 2 of them for 2 young people from the borough, and obviously working with the volunteers to deliver some events and grow that volunteering skills and help them to get to employment into that cultural space. And one really exciting festival for the end of the programme, so about spring of 2020, to try to bring emerging technologies to Mitcham. So virtual reality and augmented reality festival. We're working with some partners to make it international conference, so bringing some, having it in 2 days, bringing some industry experts and put Meacham on the map. And obviously at the end, evaluation and reflection of how we did and what sort of difference we made. I'm sure you've had a chance to read the report. Any questions, any more details? We've got Sarah Tambrin, our very skilled advisor to the CAC, who's helping us to navigate this space that is new to us as a group, and help us with a lot of stuff that we don't know, and help us to learn and be better and implement the programme. So hand it over to them.
Yes, some of you will know me because I've kind of hung around the borough for a bit, and I won the tender to write the Borough of Culture bid, which then has turned into this programme. There's quite a bit of detail in the report. I'm very happy to answer any questions on that delivery programme that we're in. We've done a number of the community film seasons already. We're just beginning on the guest curator seasons, and we can talk a bit more about that if you wish. We've commissioned the 4 filmmakers, which was an excellent experience actually going through that process, and they're now working underway. And I think it's worth adding to what Samara said, that we are seeing partnerships evolve and emerge quite fast out of this. So a very productive relationship has begun with the British Film Institute, with BFI. Their director of programming, astonishingly, is a resident of Collier's Wood and has been incredibly generous and helpful with his time. And if any of you came to the launch that CAG held in the Wimbledon Theatre, Justin helped to chair that. He helped to chair the commissioning process, but also other relationships with BFI, which means that our emerging filmmakers, all the young people who tended to take part in that, are now on the BFI mentoring programme, and the 2 who won are getting additional input and support from the Institute. So we're seeing those sorts of partnerships emerge in a number of places, and I think that's really valuable for the long-term opportunities for people in the borough, whether that's the BFI or other major institutes. It's giving Merton a profile that perhaps the borough has struggled sometimes to achieve before, and it's creating relationships across London and with national institutes that offer young residents, but not only young residents, opportunities that have been much harder to access in the past. So I think we're moving towards many of the objectives that we set ourselves. It's only April, we've got a while to go, and perhaps as a final point, we bid for a year, but the thing we did after winning the agreement with the GLA was to spread the jam a bit more thinly in time terms. So the Film Merton programme has to close before the mayoral purdah begins next April, but we're using every bit of that we can get, so we can spread it out a bit longer than just the 1 year. We've got about 18 months, but really from the launch to the end.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We've let my colleagues do the talking for that. If there are any questions from anybody, we'll be happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you, and thank you for this report, which is really exciting and really inspiring, and I'm quite ashamed that I didn't know very much about it before, especially since I'm friends with Samir, and I should have known more about it. My point in relation to that is councillors often have networks that can help reach out, and I'd love to be able to advertise, for example, the film seasons if I had a little bit more information about it. Thank you very much. And the second question or point I wanted to make was, you note the unlikelihood of future public sector support and also your ambitions to become sustainable. I wondered if you might outline some of the work on that, and perhaps also what support Merton can give to enable that to become a reality.
Thank you, and I should have been communicating more and sending more updates. I'll make a note to do that for the future. yes, the sustainability is a big concern of the group, and we definitely want to make sure there is not just this programme, but more stuff coming out of this group, and as we grow the group and make it more like a platform of having different skill set on the group, so we can utilise those skill set from the people. For example, my skill set is specifically in the business. I want to be able to focus more on bringing more funding to the group, and to be able to network with the businesses in the borough, to bring them, to get them excited about funding the cultural work, and get that. At the bottom of the flyers that you have, you can see the current sponsors, but we have a space there, so we're trying to get people to sponsor, and definitely that's something that we want to work with. If you've got any ideas to help, if you've got connections, if you know businesses in your networks, please do put in touch with them, and I'll definitely have a conversation.
And I think when we look at the launch, which was our first big public event, and the theatre and a number of businesses put in quite a lot of resource to make that happen. So I think as we now move forward into the sort of second part of this year, that's when we're going to start pushing things like sponsorship packages and philanthropic opportunities that come out of it.
To be honest, a lot of local businesses already are supporting. So for our festival, the venue we have secured in Mitcham, it's been donated to the group, or the Wimbledon Theatre, they gave it us to use.
Yeah, thank you. Some good work going on there. We're pleased to see the different people involved. The report mentions lots about Mitcham and Easterbourne in general. I was just wondering how, as a panel, you're trying to reach out and actually target those particular people you want to reach out to in Mitcham, and what venues. So I noticed looking at this, it's mostly the art space at Mitcham Library. I was just wondering if there are possible other venues. I don't really know too well what audiences are involved. That might be more useful for the residents there.
We've so there are sort of two parts to the answer to that, and so we've done quite a lot of work reaching out to different community groups who might want to run a season, and that's resulted in quite a lot of new voices coming into that. It's quite labour intensive and sometimes to support them, but that's working. We're very clear that the panels choose the venues, and that's always been a principle, that that's a place that group chooses to use. So the first season round, there was quite a lot of Pollard's Hill, the new centre there. We looked at other ones. At the moment, this one that you see, as you say, that's where those panels have chosen to be. But quite a lot of discussion about opportunities that might arise for that. And as we start looking at the guest curator panels, that will give us an opportunity to explore some others. I think one of the bits of feedback we've had, which in some ways is good, is that those panels are seeing those spaces as safe, as places that they want to do things, which is, well, great, you know. That means that the libraries and the art spaces are valued and welcomed as safe spaces to do those things in by the community. But then there are moments when you think, oh, surely there are other more exciting spaces, but that's where they want to do. So that's where they are.
Also, sorry to just add to that, we're limited in terms of venues because it needs to be suitable for film. So we're limited in terms of what venues we can choose, but we want to be able to introduce people to new venues as we are becoming aware of them as a group and put them in touch with people.
So just to finish on that, one of those new spaces we're working with the Fire Brigade about showing films at the fire station. The new fire station. The Mitcham Fire Station. So we talked to the Borough Commander a long time ago about trying to take activities which people are used to seeing, films, into more unusual spaces that might be available at other times when they're not being used for their day-to-day activities. So we are starting to say, in what is a very urban area where spaces are premium, can we actually be more able to use vacant space when it's not being quite so busy for other things? The only premise is if the fire is called, he's got to get his engines out. But we'll work around the logistics of it. But the fact that we've got other organisations locally being very open-minded, and the fact that we've already pretty much secured the venue for the Virtual Reality Festival from a new venue operator in Mitcham is good, that we're now starting to operate and open up more doors for the community.
Okay, thank you for the report and thanks for everything that's in it. I just want to say in Palazzo we had over 3 first sessions on Hidden Women, and also Louise Bennett and Nanny of the Maroon. I hosted Louise Bennett. On the night we had over 30 people attended, and it was a mixed culture. And it was knowledge learned because many people had no knowledge of who Louise Bennett was and is, and also many young people took part, and this was really good. Now our people, I say people in our ward, are asking for more. The only problem is the youth centre where we held it, the sound bounces. So that caused a big problem. So I'm wondering whether or not you could speak to New Horizon Centre and see whether we could, keep something going. Because for us, Palazzo is very small, it's really compact. I mean, we haven't got much facilities in Palazzo, and people really want to come out. And that was something that opened my eyes to see how people really want to get out. I mean, late night, they don't want to go to Mitcham, they don't want to go to Wimbledon, they want to walk somewhere where they can feel comfortable. And that was something well done.
Well,
and for the 3 sessions we had, it was really, really well supported. And not all of that. At the end, they said, oh, should we pay? And he said, no, it's free. And they were able to give some contribution to our friends of Palazzo Youth Centre. So, thank you very much. And and for 3 of these is a young man from our youth centre who will be hosting 3. And 1 in Mitcham Library, and I think 2 in Wimbledon Library. And again, the reason for that is because there's sound impact from the youth centre. Thanks.
Thank you for the report and the good effort for the place. There's always schools. There's loads of schools in Mitcham that you could approach, and they've got areas that can put into it. If they're one or particular.
I mean, on both those points, that both to work with New Horizons and schools, Christina Burton from Shine is one of the CAG, and we've talked with her, and we know we can get into those schools if that's what community panels want, and we will certainly, as we put the best seasons together, be looking at both of those issues very closely.
If I can just add that, thank you for all of that feedback, and we'll certainly happily work wherever we can within the premises that we've got. But part of this is about empowering those communities to be able to take it forward for themselves. So as much as due respect to you as councillor, but if the community come forward with us to carry on working with us to learn how to do this for themselves, that will be the great outcome of this programme. And if they want it to be in the New Horizon Centre and where they are, we can facilitate those conversations and start to make that happen. But our role in this is about bringing something new, breaking down some barriers and helping to make it happen, but it's on the terms of the community and what the community said. They choose the films, they choose the venues, we bring the tools and the expertise to help that happen and help empower them on the way so that they can continue it if they want to. That's our challenge, but we're at the beginning, so I'd like maybe at the end to hear a different story from you.
Oh, definitely you will. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great to see you. Thank you very much.
I'll leave those 3 there. If anybody wants to take them to hand out, please do. Thank you. training.
I thought that's a few areas.
To identify 3.
Yeah, happy to, Chair. So the 3 I'd pick out that I've highlighted when I went through this. On page 69, the first one is encouraging performance on parking permits issued. And that's a big issue because of the sheer volume of those permits that are issued. You can see there SP 127 is at 97%. And that's moved upwards during the year. We have got a new IT system being procured at the moment, which will allow us, when implemented, to be able to issue virtual permits. So we won't need to send out a paper copy, and the CEOs will know from their handheld computer whether a permit's been issued. So we're on the cusp of a significant change in terms of permitting, and that should improve even more. I'd ask you to treat with caution an indicator on the next page, page 70, percentage of fly tips removed within 24 hours. We show you 23%, and we know that's a significant underestimation because there's a problem with the Veolia Echo system, their computer system, and some of their vehicles don't have the equipment to be able to upload the removal of the fly tip, and with the passage of time once it is uploaded, it's not recording the true performance. And you can see the volume of fly tips continues to be very significant, just above where we've got this year so far, 10,500, that was in February. We think we're going over 12,000 this year. And the last indicator, before happy to answer questions, is an improvement in the planning enforcement cases on page 72, where planning staff have reviewed their method of working, and for one day last month they got in February, they got all planning officers a dedicated day to support the planning enforcement team into clearing cases and to assist in the processing of them. And James was here, he'd tell you that he's working with me and Morgan on a revised action plan to work through that backlog during this year, because our intention is to get that down to a much more manageable level and to resource into that during 1920.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go through ones that caught my eye, and in email conversations with Anthony and Graham, picked out a few here as well. So on page 69 at the beginning here, the sickness days within the parking here are higher, so that's SP 258. And then going on to SP 493 there, at the bottom there, the number of cases won at London tribunals. In conversation with Graham, he said that this is actually driven completely by London tribunals. So this measure will actually be removed and focus on the percentage won. So that's my focus. You don't really know how many tribunals there are there, so the figure would probably be more useful to how many we go for and win. Moving on to the regulatory services, SP041. So it seems here that the service requests here replied within 5 working days. It's below target there. I did get some information from Graham that also FOI requests within this measure, and they don't really have to reply within 5 days all the time, and so this would not be measured for 2019-20 as well. Just to finish up on street cleanliness on the next page here, I did highlight there that the percentage of sites deemed below standards is much higher than the target there as well. Those are my areas that I wanted to highlight as well. happy for panel members to highlight them as well.
Couple of points. I think I take no joy in saying this, but I think the council should consider a direct debit system for its permits, because I think administration is unwieldy, and it'll help the other draconian bastion, the BBC, do it, and take our money away from us when we shouldn't have to pay it. But the council does do it, and I think you should just have a DD system so that people automatically get their permit reviewed. Renewed, because the current system is very unwieldy, and there are a number of people that don't have computers still, don't read them right, and they don't understand these things, and they're the ones that end up getting fined, and I think it's wholly unreasonable that that's put on them. You don't need to answer any of those things, but I would suggest you do that. The other thing is SP065. I'm assuming that's the recycling rate, and the target was 46% this year. And the value for 2018-19 is year to date, as in that's almost the end of the year, isn't it? So page 20. So the month is 40%, but the year to date is 38%, and that's April to March? Yeah, so that's the full year, essentially. It's about to be. So the figure this year is 38%. So my only other question is, what was it last year, at the end of the year?
So last year the figure was, I think, at the end of the year, 35. And you'll see in the performance figures that this lagged a little behind. We're confident that this year, 1920, will be into the mid-40s. And the target for 18-19 was rather too aggressively set at the level that we would expect to get, or we hope to get in the full year, rather than the half year of the new method of waste collection that we've enjoyed so far. So I would expect that to continue to go north and to move towards the sort of performance that Sutton are enjoying with the same method of collection. And hopefully in time get towards Kingston's level, which is over 50%. But with the proper application of the education and advice and support to those residents who are unclear or unable to use the method of waste disposal and collection, we think we'll be able to get towards that sort of performance and beyond.
Yes, so I think, lucky nobody reports my speeches when I said this won't be achieved, of course, and as they might already know what my next speech will be. I think clearly the food waste works well because it's a weekly collection, and I would suggest we look at the evidence for that. I don't want any answer to that because I know they won't be honest. Not from you officers, by the way. I will criticise you.
Thank you. I have a question on the very first indicator on here, CRP at 044, page 69. I noticed the parking income has shot up to almost 17 million. So my question is, what keeps causing this, and when do you expect to hit 20 million?
The main area of income in excess of where we estimated it is around the automatic number plate recognition, capturing moving traffic offences, so that's yellow boxes, band left turns and bus lanes, where even now, probably 2.5, 3 years after the introduction, it hasn't plateaued at the level that we expected with motorist compliance. So it will come down, it is coming down, but it's coming down much more slowly than we anticipated. And that's really the main area of variance.
I have to say that, but there are some very difficult yellow boxes in Merton, and sometimes there are one or two, for example at the end of Hertford Crescent, where if you are parked, you cannot see the end of the yellow box. And I do think that officers need to look at some of these boxes because they become a danger. It shouldn't be about raising money, it isn't about safety. And I would hope that we can talk to officers about changing the shape of these boxes to make them safer?
And just to reassure the panel, all of the highway markings, including yellow boxes, comply with the Department for Transport's guidance to the letter. So they are as safe as they can be in terms of compliance with that guidance, and any variation could render them.
I'll be delighted to take an officer around some of those yellow boxes. We've tried them with me.
I've made a note.
Very happy
I'll
to do.
certainly ask them to.
Because they are difficult to get around.
Question on page 71 for item SP405, number of leisure centre users. You're quite a long way south of the number. At what point do you expect your new leisure centre to somehow make up that difference?
It is kicking in, for want of a better term, and I think what we've seen is the sort of some of the downturn as the old leisure centre came to the end of its life during this financial year that we're reporting on here, and the uptick now in the new leisure centre and the patronage there. And I know if Christine was here, she'd be talking about the plan that she's agreed with GLL, who are the main drivers of patronage at the leisure centres. And they've come up with a plan for each of the 3 leisure centres to look at increasing usage, increasing membership, particularly among younger people. And we're starting to hopefully see the benefits of that rolling through.
Most of this actually to be decided.
You just need to decide a couple of points just for the first June meeting.
Oh, okay.
Cabinet members, cabinet members,
We've heard those recently, didn't we? They changed.
No,
This is the new cabinet members. I think we might want to mention the new cabinet members. Okay, so if there's any new cabinet members, then we will this panel, I suppose we will hear from them. What else is?
Sorry, I just can't hear what you say. Sorry. In the June meeting, we have on the agenda cabinet members' priorities. Then the rest, I think, is for the panel to decide at their work when they have their workshops. So, what they want for them. Is that how it works?
Yeah. At the topic workshops on May the 20th. So decide the topics for the rest of the year. Just in June, and you can agree the work on the so we just need a few items to discuss.
Do you want any big topic for the June meeting? I don't know.
Sometimes things roll over from previous years. This time I think the court needs extra meetings, so that's why I can't give you anything specific unless officers know of any upcoming things that they want us to look at. Chris, do you have
Looking at the moment.
No, nothing.
Looking forward to the workshops.
Okay. I think, okay.
Do you have anything at all realistic?
Besides cabinet members' priorities, there's something.
Actually, the main topics suggested by residents are, as you'd expect, flight of and recycling.
I can't something what we had at June last year. Is there anything relevant that needs to come back as an annual thing?
We did the rollout of the waste programme, but that,
We
the
did.
communications, that was the big subject.
That
This
was the
year,
big subject, wasn't it?
Sustainability
was very good.
but this year I don't think you want.
You did cabinet with priorities as well, rather than running just like
Do we need the extra meeting in May, or does the timing work for us to consider parking?
No.
No, it has to come in May,
Apparently, yeah.
Can the cabinet decision be delayed until, let's say, the end of the year on parking thing? All the action beforehand. Is that possible?
No, that's. I think it's set in stone.
It's set in stone.
Yes.
Anyway, anyone got a suggestion?
Has anyone got any other suggestions for the?
Well, the thing is that most of us here may change over, so I mean, you may suggest something and the new one comes in out something different. So.
That's the advantage with Civic project. Number the other good.
Okay.
Well, we
So
are
thank
staying,
you.
I think, aren't we? Is there anything else new one? So you have time to suggest?
I was going to say, what might be helpful would be to see if we had the work programme from this year in front of us, we can maybe pick out something that I don't know.
It's got
It's just actually
do you remember we discussed it? None of them have been 6 months.
Is a highways thing due for us to look at? Is that already decided now? Is that
Highways contract goes to cabinet in June, or
the lip thing in June, that's something to look at. Any
in May.
We're
Oh, it's May now.
coming in May because it's going to June cabinet. Otherwise, we were thinking of putting it in the, unless you want it as a briefing document rather than input.
we want to do it.
Well, they actually said today, people, that we could look at the next document before it goes cabinet, which means it goes to the end of May.
Yeah.
It goes to May's meeting.
Yeah.
James was basically what he'd probably do is give us the cabinet before maybe it should go to cabinet and we could say yes or no, or we want that this to make a recommendation.
Can you review by email?
Yes, that'd probably be the best thing.
if we do that, we circulate.
Yeah.
Circulate deadlines, so I need to get officers to prepare anything.
I mean, how long does parking will take? It will take 2 hours.
Maybe depends how we engineer it. It's that one.
David will be here.
David will be there. So I
2.5
am
hours.
going to provide representations on public business.
So finally, I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for not just you as chair of sustainability committee and helping me through the year. Making it.
Sounds like you're off somewhere.
Yeah, I might be.
There you go.